No power, no respect, and the constant thrill of potential death with each bite you take. Welcome to life as a royal food taster in medieval Europe, where your job description is essentially die before the king does. Picture yourself as Yorick Davenport, recently promoted to royal food taster for King Edmund III of a modest but ambitious 14th century kingdom. Like most food tasters, Yorick didn't exactly volunteer for this position. His qualifications: being a prisoner with a functional digestive system and a strong desire not to be executed for his unpaid debts. "Congratulations," announced Lord Chamberlain on Yorick's first day, with all the warmth of a January frost. "Your life now has purpose. You will die meaningfully, should the occasion arise." The medieval nobility had excellent reasons to fear poisoning. Unlike modern politicians who worry about approval ratings, medieval rulers worried about being murdered by approximately everyone: rival nobles, neighboring kingdoms, disgruntled servants, and occasionally their own family members. Historical records show that poison was the preferred method of assassination because it could be administered discreetly and often mimicked natural illness. The perfect crime in an era before forensic science consisted of a little arsenic in the royal wine. Yorick's daily routine began hours before the king awoke. He would arrive at the royal kitchen where Chef Maurice, a man whose temper matched the heat of his ovens, would greet him with customary disdain. "Ah, the king's predigester arrives. Tell me, will you be spitting the food back onto His Majesty's plate, or shall I prepare extra portions?" The chef's contempt wasn't personal. He simply considered food tasters an insult to his culinary integrity. Meanwhile, Yorick had to sample every ingredient before cooking, during preparation, and after the final dish was assembled. On feast days, this could mean tasting upwards of 60 different items, from exotic spices to questionable meat pastries that had been decorated to disguise their age. What many don't realize is that being a food taster wasn't simply eating delicious royal cuisine before everyone else. The process was methodical and deeply unpleasant. Yorick had to hold each bite in his mouth long enough to detect unusual flavors, then wait between courses to see if his throat closed up, his stomach cramped, or his vision blurred. Nothing says bon appetit like wondering if your next swallow will be your last. "You know what's truly unfair?" Yorick complained to Dahlia Thatcher, a kitchen maid who occasionally showed him kindness. "If I die from poisoned food, I've done my job correctly, but I'm still, dead." "At least you'll be remembered as the man who saved the king," Dahlia offered. "Yes, I'm sure they'll erect a magnificent statue." Here lies Yorick, who foamed at the mouth most patriotically. The historical reality of food tasting was even more absurd than Yorick's complaints. Many royal tasters were forced to consume quantities that would make a glutton wince. King Henry VIII tasters reportedly had to sample over 100 dishes during elaborate feasts. Since executing a taster for refusing to eat would defeat the purpose of having one, they were often force-fed suspected dishes until symptoms appeared or didn't. Perhaps the worst part of Yorick's job was the waiting period after tasting. Food tasters typically had to sit in full view of the court for at least an hour after sampling, subjected to the scrutinizing gaze of nobles watching for any sign of distress. "Your face looks peculiar," remarked Lady Beatrice during one such occasion. "Are you certain you aren't dying?" "No more than usual, my lady. This is simply my face." Keep breathing obviously, so we know you're alive." This monitoring period created its own special torment. Many poisons of the medieval era, extracted from plants like hemlock, foxglove, and deadly nightshade, could take hours to show full effects. This meant Yorick spent his days in a state of perpetual uncertainty, wondering if that slight stomach discomfort was merely indigestion or the beginning of a painful end. The cruel irony of the food taster's position was that the better they were at their job, the longer they survived, only to face the same potentially lethal test at the next meal. Success meant returning to the same risk day after day, meal after meal. One Tuesday in spring, Yorick faced his most terrifying challenge yet: a diplomatic feast hosting emissaries from a neighboring kingdom with whom relations had been, at best, murderous. The visiting dignitary had brought his own food taster, a grim-faced man named Walter who had survived 15 years in his position, a record that made him something of a legend in food-tasting circles. Before the feast, Walter pulled Yorick aside. "Listen, boy. You've got the posture of a startled hare and the complexion of spoiled milk. You won't last a month like that. Forgive me if I don't take career advice from someone whose professional success is measured in not dead yet," Yorick replied. Walter shook his head. "The secret is to make yourself valuable beyond your tongue. Learn who's sleeping with whom, which nobles are in debt, which servants steal wine. Information keeps you alive better than a quick gag reflex." This actually reflected historical practice. Surviving records indicate that long-lived food tasters often served multiple roles at court, becoming confidants who knew royal secrets and preferences. Some even rose to positions of influence, though they rarely escaped their original duty. The diplomatic feast proceeded with excruciating tension. Each dish required both Yorick and Walter to sample it before either ruler would touch their food. The two men developed an unspoken competition, with Walter maintaining impressive stoicism while Yorick struggled not to grimace at particularly challenging dishes. "What do you call this delightful creation?" asked the visiting king, pointing to a gelatinous mound that smelled strongly of fish. "Lamprey pie, your majesty," replied King Edmund, "a specialty of our kingdom." Both food tasters sampled the dish with practiced neutrality, though Yorick later swore to Dahlia that he felt his soul trying to escape through his nostrils. The true absurdity of medieval food tasting wasn't just the constant poisoning risk. It was that many royal meals were themselves barely distinguishable from poison. Medieval nobility had a disturbing preference for meats preserved far beyond reasonable limits, heavily spiced to mask spoilage. Many royal recipes called for combinations that would horrify modern nutritionists. Peacock redressed in its feathers after cooking, swan stuffed with smaller birds, and cockantrice, the front half of a suckling pig sewn to the back half of a capon, then roasted and gilded with gold leaf. The things they voluntarily eat are worse than anything an assassin would devise, Yorick complained after a particularly challenging banquet featuring jellied eels. "I survived 4 courses of deliberate excess only to be murdered by dessert, a pudding that tasted of sweetened grave dirt." Another overlooked aspect of the food taster's plight was their inability to refuse anything. When King Edmund developed a passion for exotic food from distant lands, Yorick found himself sampling dishes containing ingredients he couldn't pronounce, let alone identify. "What is this?" he asked the royal physician after developing an alarming rash following one such meal. "A reaction to either the pepper from India, the unfamiliar fish, or possibly the decorative flowers that weren't meant to be eaten," replied the doctor. "Since you're not dead, I suggest scratching less dramatically. The king wishes to finish his meal without your distracting discomfort." By some miracle, Yorick survived a full year as royal food taster, developing both an iron stomach and the cunning Walter had recommended. He learned which courtiers received mysterious packages, which servants held grudges, and most importantly, how to appear perfectly healthy even when digestively devastated. His moment of true validation came during the midsummer feast when he detected a bitter almond flavor in the king's wine, the telltale sign of certain poisons. His dramatic spitting and theatrical collapse caused chaos, but guards apprehended the would-be assassin, a minor noble with major ambitions. Yorick expected rewards, perhaps even retirement from tasting duties. Instead, King Edmund granted him a small purse of silver and the honor of continuing his service with increased vigilance. "You've proven your value," the king declared magnanimously. "Few men can claim they've saved a monarch's life." "Thank you, your majesty," Yorick replied, bowing deeply to hide his expression. "Though I confess I'd rather be less valuable and more unnecessary." The final irony of the food taster's existence was that their success guaranteed their continued service. The better they performed, the more indispensable they became, trapped in a cycle of perpetual risk with only 2 possible exits: promotion to another position or a painful, foaming-at-the-mouth departure. After 2 years of service, Yorick had achieved a peculiar kind of fame. Other servants stepped aside when he passed, either out of respect or fear that whatever had failed to kill him might be contagious. Dahlia, now the assistant cook, became his closest confidant, helping him identify suspicious ingredients and occasionally sneaking him remedies for his perpetually abused digestive system. You know, she told him one evening as they sat in a quiet corner of the kitchen, you've lasted longer than the last 3 tasters combined. Wonderful, Yorick sighed. I've achieved longevity in a profession where the retirement plan is a marked grave. Still better than my position, she countered. Nobody notices when a kitchen maid saves the day by not burning the bread. Despite the constant dangers and indignities, Yorick eventually developed an unusual pride in his work. There was something perversely satisfying about cheating death 3 times daily while developing a palate sophisticated enough to detect minute changes in the royal cuisine. The most remarkable aspect of medieval food tasters, attested in numerous historical accounts, is that some genuinely became gastronomy experts whose opinions shaped royal menus. Their survival depended on noticing the slightest deviation from normal taste, inadvertently making them the world's first food critics, albeit ones whose negative reviews came with higher stakes than a mere loss of restaurant stars. After 3 years of loyal tongue service, Yorick was finally promoted to royal cupbearer, a position that still required tasting but came with better clothes and the privilege of standing closer to power. When Dahlia asked if he was happy about the promotion, he offered the food taster's philosophical perspective. Life as a royal food taster teaches you one valuable lesson. Every meal could be your last, so savor it. After carefully testing it for arsenic, nightshade, and suspicious powders, I've survived thousands of potentially lethal meals only to discover that the real poison was the job itself. But at least now I get to die in nicer clothes. And so began Yorick's new career, standing slightly closer to the throne but still swallowing fear with every sip, proving that in medieval courts, upward mobility simply meant more elegant ways to risk your life for someone who would replace you before your body grew cold. The ultimate case of you are what you eat, where what you eat might just be death itself.